Lieutenant Höhler, of No. 8 Heavy Company of Regiment 192, took part in the breakout. We received orders to abandon our positions during the night of 19–20 August and break through in the direction of Trun. There was still a gap of 5 kilometers, in which only a few enemy patrols had been detected. For our battle-weary unit, the withdrawal by night was almost superhuman. The closer we got to the breakout point, the more ghastly was the scene that met our eyes. The roads were blocked by 2 or 3 shot up, burned-out vehicles standing alongside each other. Ammunition was exploding, tanks were burning, and horses lay struggling on their backs until they were eventually released. In the fields far and wide was the same chaos. The enemy artillery fired into the turmoil from all sides. Everything was pressing east. We had to pass through St. Lambert. There, a small operations staff had been set up. Panther and Tiger tanks of the SS divisions took the lead, while the enemy fired non-stop into the village with anti-tank guns and artillery. We forced our way through regardless. Shot-up tanks and vehicles were pushed aside. Many dead and wounded from previous breakouts lay by the side of the road. As far as room was available, we took the wounded with us, or at least cared for them. We jumped out of our armored personnel carriers to cover SS tanks that a number of enemy anti-tank guns had neutralized. 2 generals, whose infantry divisions had been wiped out, just shook their heads over our reckless attempt to break out. They marched with us. During the night we made a brief stop, so that the men could rest and the wounded be attended. Through the vigorous thrust of the SS tanks, the enemy sustained such heavy losses that they were unable to close the pocket even on the following day, the 21st of August. While the tanks held the gap open, more and more groups, some quite small, filtered through the hold to the east. We set a course by compass and marched off. We had escaped the infamo once again. In the afternoon of the 21st of August it was all over, the pocket was closed. How, if at all, could the men recover from this blood-letting and terrible experience? Precise figures for the chaos in the Falaise pocket are hardly possible. According to estimates, there were between 90,000 and 100,000 men in the pocket before the last gap was closed on the 21st of August. Despite urgent requests, Hitler had neglected to pull back our divisions in sufficient time. It is known that about 10,000 men were killed and that between 40,000 and 50,000 were able to break out. Some 40,000 men in the pocket were taken prisoner, including several general headquarters and the remains of 15 divisions, mainly infantry. The fact that such a large number of men were able to escape from the pocket, and at once reassemble to offer resistance, showed their high level of training. The danger was not yet over. I eventually got through to the divisional commander, who told me, the situation is completely out of hand. All that is known for certain is that General Patton had already reached Chartres, southwest of Paris, on the 18th of August, and the Seine near Fontainebleau on the 21st of August. According to unconfirmed reports, he has been able to form 2 small bridgeheads there over the Seine. From Chartres, General Feuchtinger went on. Patton has turned north with part of his army and is advancing on the Rouen area. No one seems able to stop him. We are now threatened with a new pocket south and west of the Seine, and all the bridges across it appear to have been destroyed. I am authorized to bring Roch's combat group and the Panzer reconnaissance battalion, which lost almost all its materiel in the pocket, over the Seine at once and to move it to an area northeast of Paris, where it can be restored to strength. Divisional headquarters will move even further east, probably to the region west of the Vosges, to establish a defensive position there and a reception line for the units withdrawing from southern France. You, Luck, continued Feuchtinger, will take over all elements of the division that are still operational. These are to assemble northeast of Rouen. I no longer have any tanks, but you will get the last 2 patrols of the reconnaissance battalion. If Montgomery now pushes forward vigorously, I don't give much for your chances of still being able to cross the Seine. In the first place, you will withdraw gradually in the direction of the Seine, where remaining elements of the engineer battalion will wait for you with the last pontoons. From now on you are on your own. I can't tell you where you will get fuel, ammunition, and food. Help yourself. As to the route of your march to the east and its destination, where the division is to assemble, you will receive further orders before I move out. All the best, Luck. Bring me back lots of men from our division. On that decisive the 21st of August, my units were disposed for defense. On the 22nd of August I disengaged from the enemy. Montgomery, thank goodness, did not vigorously follow. Quite the contrary, he operated very cautiously, without risking anything. That gave us a bit of leeway. The Allied Air Force could no longer intervene so specifically, for it was too difficult to tell friend from foe. On the 23rd of August, we felt our way forward in the direction of Rouen, still unmolested by Montgomery's divisions. I was concerned about Feuchtinger's report that on the same day Patton was advancing on Rodin practically parallel to us. Who would get there fast, and how would we cross the Seine fast enough? Patton, however, according to our own reconnaissance, was not yet in evidence. Instead, we were joined by elements of an SS Panzer division. We agreed to cross the river, with the help of the engineers, at one of the loops in the Seine west of Rouen. Not until after the war did I learn that Montgomery had drawn a new line of demarcation between the British and the Americans, which ran past Mantes on the Seine, west of Paris, far to the northeast via Amiens-Lille as far as Ghent in Belgium. This meant that Patton had to recall his elements advancing on Rouen and use them elsewhere. We were concerned at the time only with Monty, and he, for whatever reasons, was moving forward very hesitantly. When we reached the Seine, we covered ourselves to the south with the SS tanks. But all the makeshift Seine crossings were hopelessly overcrowded. Infantry supply units and parties of stragglers were competing there, sometimes with the use of force, for the few ferries. When we had chosen our crossing point we let no one else through. We intended to save our fighting vehicles and our men. While the engineers were constructing a pontoon ferry, every possibility was considered and tried for getting over the 400-meter-wide river. Captain Krieger, my adjutant at the time, told me a few days later that he and his men had taken doors off their hinges in the neighboring villages and made them buoyant with empty fuel cans. Each of these mini-ferries was able to convey about 8 men. Our collaboration with the SS tank people went well. I assured them that they would be carried over on our pontoon ferry last of all. We kept calm, the men waited quietly in the woods near our crossing point, until they were called. There was none of the hectic atmosphere of Rouen, to which the bulk of the troops had withdrawn in order to cross by a railway bridge that had remained intact. My HQ company had a VW amphibious car, which till then I had never used. I asked if it was serviceable. It should float, came the answer, as far as we can tell. Despite all the preceding hardships and the tense situation, I decided to cross in this car, as the last of my combat group. By the 26th of August, all elements of the group were over and issued with orders for assembling. During the night of 28–29 of August we camouflaged the car with tree branches, to avoid being spotted and sunk by Allied fighters. In the morning I took the wheel, beside me my adjutant Liebskind and behind us the driver and an observer. We soon found a flat spot and I drove cautiously into the river. Watch out for leaks. It floated. I let myself be carried downstream by the current. Liebskind looked for a spot where we could land. Carefully I nudged the car to the right to approach the opposite bank. Fighters to the left, cried our observer. I at once switched off the engine and let the bush drift downstream. The fighters seemed to take us for what we had intended by our camouflage, a bush. Liebskind looked desperately for somewhere to land. But we were thwarted everywhere by steep banks and heavy undergrowth. Finally, after a river trip of almost 15 kilometers, we found a flat spot where we were able to drive ashore comfortably and unseen. An hour later we were with my combat group, which by then had almost given us up for lost. I made contact for the last time with our divisional commander, who briefed me on the situation and our task. Luck. I am glad you have managed to bring virtually the whole of your combat group safely over the Seine. The situation at the moment is completely out of hand. I was summoned to corps, but they had to leave their command post in haste because the Americans were coming. No one knows where our own units are, let alone those of the enemy. I received a clear order 2 days ago according to which divisional headquarters, the hard-hit units of Rock's combat group and all supply elements are to be moved at once to the region of Molsheim, west of Strasbourg, to be restored to strength. The division is to form a prepared position as far west as possible for elements of the weak 1st and 19th Armies withdrawing from southern France via Belfort. On the 15th of August, strong American elements landed in southern France. These are now pressing forward to the north. As soon as you have got your group together and organized, you will march east, in order to reach the area west of Strasbourg as quickly as possible. Watch out that you don't fall into the hands of the Americans, who are now advancing over the Seine along a wide front. Where and how you will be able to organize fuel, ammunition, and food, I don't know. You will have to help yourself. All the best. We had only a little ammunition left, so we could not be drawn into any battles. It was a long way to the Strasbourg area. I figured a week at least, assuming we made good progress. To avoid being taken unawares by the Americans pressing north, I issued the following orders. The 2 patrols of the Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion were to reconnoiter south of my planned line of march and report every contact with the enemy by radio. Every 100 kilometers an officer with a radio set was to be posted at the most important road crossings, to report enemy movements. A supply party with the last 3 trucks and 2 SPWS armored half-track vehicles with radio were to search constantly for supply depots, which were bound to be located near large towns. The bulk of my combat group were to march east at wide intervals, in part along minor roads. I laid down our destination each day. We then set off, first swinging well north of Rouen and then east, passing well north of Paris. For the first 2 days we made only slow progress. We were marching parallel to the front and across the American line of advance. On the 3rd day fuel became short. The supply party had been told to organize fuel without fail, but if possible also ammunition. In fact, the trucks turned up that evening, loaded with what was wanted. They even brought some food. We were all grateful to these men, who had after all managed to find a depot somewhere or other. The report from the officer responsible made us laugh, but also swear. When we found the depot, he told us angrily, and demanded fuel for our combat group. We received the typical, impudent reply. We can issue nothing without written authority. When I asked, and what will you do if the Americans get here tomorrow, which is highly likely, the answer was, then in accordance with orders we would blow the depot up. That made my men so angry that they advanced threateningly on the storekeeper. I had to restrain them. Calmly but unmistakably I gave the bureaucratic gentleman my answer. If I don't have fuel, ammunition, and food within half an hour I can no longer be responsible for anything. So get on with it, get your stuff out. While our supply problem, thanks to my excellent search party, would be safe until we arrived in the prescribed concentration area, no danger, thank goodness, emerged on my right, southern flank. The Americans seemed to have no idea that a combat group was marching east in front of them, across their line of advance. Even the Air Force failed to show up. Only once did one of our 2 patrols report contact with American patrol, which turned away, however, apparently without seeing us. Via Campaign, where 4 years earlier Hitler had signed the armistice with France, we marched past Verdun in the direction of Metz. We were out of the actual battle area and made more frequent stops, to give the weary drivers a little rest and to assemble our units. Supply was now less of a problem, though the threat of force had to sometimes be used. While still some way from Metz, we turned southeast in the direction of Nancy, and on via Baccarat. On the 9th of September, after an 11-day march, we reached the prescribed area west of Strasbourg. We were all dead tired. We had been in action without a break for over 3 months. We needed rest and, urgently, replacements of men and materiel. The strength of my grenadier companies was down to 50 men. Our assembly area lay between the Vosges and Strasbourg, between the Maginot Line and the Western Wall. I let the men find billets in the surrounding villages and went in search of the divisional command post. The autumn sun still had some warmth. The Rhine Valley lay peacefully below me as I ascended the winding road to the Vosges highway. For more than 4 years the war here had been suspended. I met one of the division's supply vehicles. The driver thought divisional headquarters must be somewhere on the western fringe of the Vosges. I had been unable to make contact by radio. Suddenly a jeep with an army pennant drew up beside me. I saluted and found myself standing in front of General Hasso von Manteuffel, a colleague from the 7th Panzer Division, who in Russia in 1941 had commanded a grenadier regiment. "Luck, how nice to see you again after so long," he greeted me. "What are you doing here?" I put him briefly in the picture and asked if he knew where our divisional headquarters might be and what the situation was in general. "The situation, my dear Luck, is bloody awful. I too only got here yesterday from Belgium, to take command of the 5th Panzer Army." The picture Manteuffel gave me was not encouraging. Before I left Belgium, Montgomery had taken the offensive with his army group and, against weak resistance, had reached Brussels on the 3rd of September and Antwerp on the 4th. Far more dangerous, however, was the thrust of the Americans, General Patton, with his 3rd U.S. Army. It was Patton who managed to make the decisive breakthrough at Avranches and who then, without regard for his open southern flank, pushed vigorously to the east. I would almost call him the American Rommel. He has a high standing with Eisenhower, and in the U.S. he is feted as a hero. Statements from prisoners confirm this time and again. By the end of August the Americans were being forced to pause. Their supply lines from Cherbourg and several ports in Normandy were becoming too long. Since the beginning of September, however, the Americans have taken the offensive again. The 1st U.S. Army reached Mons on the 2nd of September and took 30,000 prisoners. Patton, without regard for his right flank, has pressed forward the furthest. He has reached Verdun and is now advancing on Metz and Nancy, hence on the Moselle. The 6th U.S. Army Group, including the 1st French Army, is approaching from southern France and is supposed to join up with Patton. The remains of our retreating armies from the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coast are, it is true, still holding a wedge that extends as far as Dijon, but for how much longer? The worst of it is, Manteuffel went on. Hitler is juggling with divisions that are divisions no more. And now, ironically, and with a shake of his head, Hitler wants to launch a tank attack from the Dijon area to the north, in order, as he likes to put it, to seize Patton in the flank, cut his lines of communication and destroy him. What a misjudgment of the situation and the possibilities open to us. I was deeply disturbed. What do you think should be done? I asked Manteuffel. Conduct a mobile defense here on the western slopes of the Vosges and to the west of Saarbrücken, in order to make the western wall defensible again, and to occupy it. That would offer a chance of delaying the enemy for a longer period of time. Here in the west we need time, to enable us to prepare for the Russian offensive. But that, my dear Luck, is likely to remain an illusion. I wish you all the best. Come through the last battle in one piece. A handshake and he was gone. I was not to see Manteuffel again until long after the war. I eventually found divisional headquarters. Feuchtinger was pleased that I had brought him back the combat group intact. I told him of my meeting with Manteuffel. I am glad to hear a little about the general situation, he said. Our division belongs to Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army, but I have not met him yet. First of all, something pleasant. Feuchtinger beckoned to his adjutant. In the name of the Führer I have the honor and great pleasure to bestow on you the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Ceremonially he took the order from its black case and hung it around my neck, and, as if to order, someone was there with a camera. I had to pose with Feuchtinger. The decoration has been here since August, but then, of course, you were still on the Long March. I had recommended you long ago for exceptional bravery and for your personal commitment in Normandy, especially in the defense against Monty's Operation Goodwood on July 18. Someone was on hand with a glass of champagne. We drank, not to final victory, but to our all getting home safely after the war. I was naturally proud of the decoration. General, I can and will accept this order only on behalf of all my people. Without them I could never have succeeded in achieving what you are honoring me for. We had to pass on to the order of the day. Give your men a little rest, Feuchtinger began. Interiel and a Luftwaffe replacement battalion have arrived. Just imagine, among them are fully trained pilots and boys of 16 and 17. How are we supposed to stop the Allies now with their inexhaustible materiel, when we were sent mere cannon fodder as replacements? You already know from Manteuffel that our task is to set up a defensive barrier, so that the remains of the two armies withdrawing from the west and south can be brought into the gap between us and the Swiss border. Yesterday, with a heavy heart, I had to send Colonel Roch with his patched-up regiment into the Epinal area, to guard the Moselle crossings. According to reports in our hands, elements of Patton's forces are advancing south from Nancy and the 2nd French Armored Division from the west on Dijon. We simply have to stop them. You two must anticipate going into action in the next few days. With that I was dismissed. Molsheim is a small town in the Rhine Valley west of Strasbourg. There and in the surrounding villages my combat group was to be given a chance to recover. The local people spoke French and German. Like all Alsace-Lothainians they had changed nationality more than once during the wars between France and Germany. At the moment, Hitler laid claim to Alsace-Lorraine. In a few weeks, it looked as though it would again be French territory. The villages, where the houses resembled those of the Black Forest in style, provided billets for my men. Most of them were sleeping in beds again for the first time in months. As for me and my staff, we were quartered in a little inn. My adjutant and the other officers were seated at the bar with a glass of Traminer, the famous wine of the area. A great cheer went up when I came in. I had forgotten that I still had the Knight's Cross around my neck. Congratulations, it was about time, Lieutenant Colonel. I gave a deprecatory wave. It is meant for all the men of our regiment. I will wear it with pride for them. That was all I could say. I just want to try to call Berlin. Then I will tell you something about the situation and our task. After only 15 minutes my intelligence officer was back. We have the connection to Berlin. Dagmar was on the line. Thank God, you were alive. I have not been able to sleep. I tried to get news through friends at the personnel office. No one could tell me anything. The situation is too confused, was all they said. How are you? I am fine, as far as it goes. I am just terribly tired. I too have been worrying about you every day and wondering whether you got out of Paris safely. How did it go? As arranged. 2 days before the Allies marched in, a truck appeared from headquarters, Paris, and took me and my bicycle to Berlin. Saying goodbye to our friends in Paris was hard. They again offered to hide me in the south of France until the war was over. They all sent their greetings. Just as I was going to tell Dagmar about the Knight's Cross, the connection was broken. At least each of us know that the other was alive and well. I sent for all the commanders and briefed them on the situation, as it had been described to me by Manteuffel and Feuchtinger. In the next 2 or 3 days every unit, in collaboration with the division's supply posts, should receive replacements of men and material. See to it that our experienced corporals and lance corporals take the young men in hand and fit them in quickly. We must anticipate action at short notice. Then we all had a drink together, a closely knit team that had survived the past months. It suddenly dawned on us that only a few kilometers now separated us from the Reich, and that Hitler required us to fight till the final victory or go under, as his propaganda minister Goebbels proclaimed every day. Lieutenant Colonel, do you believe the rumors that Hitler is trying to make a separate peace with the Western Allies, in order to have his back free for the fight against the Russians? It was one of the questions that were also being discussed by the men. No, was my reply. Like me, you probably listen to the British radio now and then, on the sly. Churchill and the Americans are out to destroy Hitler and his regime. There's no room there for a separate peace. I was able to speak fairly freely. We were all level-headed enough to distinguish between facts and pipe dreams. No one would think us defeatist for that. I believe Manteuffel's idea is the only solution, that is, to man the Western Wall again, if it is not already too late for that. As far as I know, all the weapons and communication systems were dismantled in 1940 and reinstalled in the Atlantic Wall. If that is so, we might be able to use the Western Wall as shelter from bombs and artillery fire, but not for defense. I am alarmed about the situation on the Eastern Front, where the Russians will undoubtedly be mounting for last great offensive, which will carry them far into German territory. The reports of atrocities to our wives and daughters make one fear the worst. We were very thoughtful as we sat for another hour over our glasses of Traminer. Each of us was thinking of our own situation and the weeks and months that lay ahead of us. After 2 days any hope of rest was over. Division ordered my 2 battalion to join Rock's combat group at once and take up positions at the Moselle crossings in the Epinal area. Major Kurz had received only a few replacements and little materiel. See that the young newcomers are taken in hand by veterans and quickly acclimatized to combat conditions, I said as we went along. I am expecting to be sent into action again myself in the next few days. I will try to get Major Lehr some new SPWS for his I-armored battalion. I am sorry, Kurz, we can only try to set our longer war experience against our opponent's superiority in men and materiel. Kurz was an experienced commander, who in the battles of the past months had more than once shown circumspection and personal bravery. It was indeed not long before I too was involved. I was summoned to division. Luck, Colonel Roch is sick and has to go home. You will take over his combat group at once. It will now be known as the combat group of the 21st Panzer Division. Hitler is sticking to his intention of attacking from the area west of Epinal, northward deep in Patton's flank. Madness, if one considers the physical state of the two sides. 3 newly created panzer brigades have arrived, a new conception of high command. They are certainly equipped with the latest war materiel, such as the Panther, and they have experienced commanders. But they don't know each other. The units have never practiced combat maneuvers. After our heavy losses, why don't they give us this new materiel? Your task is to hold the Moselle crossings north of Epinal with your front to the west, while a panzer brigade west of Epinal thrusts north, supported by the remains of the infantry divisions. But watch out. After French units of the 2nd Armored Division and elements of the 1st French Army coming up from the south have met and taken Dijon, they will be threatening to push eastward, to encircle the remains of the infantry and the panzer brigade. That will depend on how the French fight. Take over the division's combat group with your staff this very evening. Further orders will follow. On the morning of the 12th of September, I received orders to support the Panzer Brigade's attack, which was to thrust north in front of me with its panzer group west of Epinal and against the 2nd Armored Division with its IV group. I was to support the Panther group. So began the debacle of Epinal. Perhaps, remembering 1940, we underestimated the French, in the 2nd French Armored Division, which supported by massive air attacks and the excellent American artillery was equipped with the best materiel and brilliantly led, moreover, by General Charles Leclerc. We were up against an opponent that had not only been the first to march into Paris, but now saw the chance to play an active part in liberating France from the hated Nazis. As we were told by prisoners, civilians had informed the French Colonel Langlade that my combat group was on the way from Epinal to the west. Langlade decided to attack the Panther group in the north early on the 13th of September and separate it from the southern group before I could come to its relief with my combat group. The plan succeeded. Only 4 remaining Panthers were able to fight their way through and meet up with me. Owing to fierce air and artillery attacks by the Americans, the Panzer IV group operating further south was unable to stop the French division. On that the 13th of September, the 2 panzer groups lost 34 Panthers and 26 Panzer IV's. Our infantry in the area was destroyed. To prevent a complete debacle, I launched an attack with my combat group, though without tanks, in the late afternoon. At first we made good progress, but then, owing to strong resistance, I was forced to call off the engagement. On the 14th of September, my combat group was able to join up with the Panzer IV group. Together with the remaining 17 tanks we once again mounted an attack. With only 240 grenadier and hardly any artillery of our own, we were able to gain a little ground, but were then brought to a standstill by the massive American artillery. As a result, Corps headquarters gave orders that rearward positions west of Epinal were to be occupied during the night, for we were to be spared, so that we would be available for the attack on Patton's flank that Hitler was still planning. It proved impossible to free our 16th Infantry Division from the encirclement. Only 500 men reached our lines, 7,000 men died or were taken prisoner. After the 2nd French Armored Division and elements of the 1st French Army coming from the south had again joined forces, they crossed the Moselle south of us on the 14th of September. On the 15th of September Nancy fell into the hands of the Americans. On the 16th of September there were virtually no German forces left west of the Moselle. Hitler's senseless, unrealistic plan of seizing Patton's army in the flank and destroying it had become illusory, as had been foreseen by Manteuffel and all of us. 3 rivers flow from the Vosges to the northwest practically parallel to each other, the Moselle, the Mortagne, and the Meurthe. We clung to all 3 in turn, until we were either bypassed or our weak defensive barrier was broken through. Luneville on the Meurthe, southeast of Nancy, was an important junction if, after Nancy, the enemy managed to capture Luneville too. The way to the north past the Vosges to Saarbrücken and Reich territory would lie open to him. In the second half of September fierce fighting broke out around Luneville. American units penetrated into the town. In bitter counterattacks elements of 2 out of the total of 3 new panzer brigades regained part of the town. Tough hand-to-hand fighting from house to house led to heavy casualties on both sides. The combat group of the 21st Panzer Division under my command had the task of blocking the crossings over the Mortagne south of Luneville with 1 battalion and then, with the main body, also advancing on Luneville from the south. Despite its replacements through the Luftwaffe battalion, the strength of the battalion of Regiment 192 that was carrying the attack against Luneville was down to only 100 grenadier, while my 2 battalion under Major Kurz had just 140 men left with which to defend the long stretch of river. While Feuchtinger was conducting the battle for Luneville, my interest concerned my 2 battalion. We were again confronted by the 2nd French Armored Division. On the Moselle, Major Kurz had still been able to take a bridgehead from this division and gain a considerable success. Now we were exposed to the onslaught of the whole division, which was supported once more by heavy and concentrated fire from the American artillery. A first attack by a reinforced French armored group was successfully beaten off with the help of our artillery and some 8.8 cm anti-tank guns. With an even stronger attack, however, the French, in a skillful operation, managed to cross the Mortagne during the night of 18–19 September and form a bridgehead. The enemy now threatened to roll up our weak front on the Mortagne from the south. Under this impression, Army Group G authorized the withdrawal of the combat group of the 21st Panzer Division behind the Mert, over which our engineers constructed a pontoon bridge that very night. The battle for Luneville was still raging while we were already being forced to abandon the second river defense. Thank goodness the enemy had to pause again, to bring up supplies. Even so, the French sounded out the ground with patrols as far as the Macourt, where they were at once repulsed by us. After hard fighting, Luneville was lost. At the beginning of October, I was summoned with my commanders to the divisional command post.